Some of you might remember the word prude and its derivative noun, prudishness. Now, this isn't a word you'll hear very frequently these days for a number of reasons. Number one, matter of factly, almost nobody is prude anymore. Nobody tends to hold out on these things. It's near universal, except in perhaps a few select circles, that sex and sexual activity is heavily encouraged and promoted, irrespective of where you stand in society. So prudery or prudishness is not a word that has a lot of currency, and words that don't have a lot of currency tend not to be used very frequently. But what I want to talk about today is the relationship between economic prosperity and prudery. And it's a very interesting relationship, not least of which because many of the things you can observe have been observed in the manosphere before, but I'll be referencing an older article that refers to data and research, which effectively states that women become more prude when they are economically dependent on the men, and or in societies that are less prosperous, where women depend more on male labor, women tend to exhibit greater prudishness. And interestingly enough, independent of variables such as race, ethnicity, culture, politics, etc. And in fact, very interestingly, women had harsher views of promiscuity than men did in these cases where they viewed promiscuity as negative. Because we are wont to often comment on the effects of technology, and inasmuch as birth control, the pill, is a form of technology, the effects that something like that has had on society and the genders and the relations and sex more broadly. But as all things are within a complex system, it is complicated and complex, which is to say there's some kind of feedback loop going back and forth between relative economic prosperity and the technologies available. It's hard to say which begot the other. It's a chicken or the egg question, and not terribly important, but it's important to note. So let's start with the interesting point of why women who depend on male financial support and in general have less access to money view promiscuity more harshly on average. Well, it's no surprise, but I theorized a long time ago, and I think it's true, that women, for the most part, have an internal, inborn sense of the form of currency they offer. They offer sex. We mask this behind all sorts of veils and mirages in conventional society. We talk about deeper values, but sex, along with the intimacy that women offer men, is their primary means of currency in the world, especially when they're younger. When they get older, the currency is a bit different, but that's a topic for a separate video. Nonetheless, that's the currency. And they know this. They know that, for example, that they have looks, and they instinctually capitalize off these looks, that they need to make the best use of those looks possible. And holding out on sex and intercourse is a good way to ensure the loyalty of a man who wants to quote-unquote get laid, at least in an earlier time and epoch. So, of course, women would take a very harsh view of promiscuity in such circumstances for the very simple reason that they only stand to benefit. Remember that women, unlike men, tend to engage in so-called reputational damage, gossip, what have you. The ability to knock a person down a notch, particularly another woman, by speaking ill of that person, speaking badly of that person, saying that they're a slut, saying that they're promiscuous. That sort of thing really helps in these cases. And on top of that, there is the fear that they could potentially lose access to the male resources that they depend on. And so that also ensures a sense of promiscuity, as well as the concerns that the man himself has about paternity insurance and whether or not he can actually rely on the female in question. Now, I'd state here that the principles we're talking about are not operative in the current world model. I think we're aware of this. This type of model existed at some point in time, but it's no longer the case. And part of the reason, I've talked about this a lot, most recently in my most recent video, in fact, at least I alluded to it partly, is this notion of just economic opportunity associated with sex. But the fact that there's now more wealth than there ever has been, and I know there will be critiques of that, and I'm not making that statement in terms of money supply or savings or any specific economic factor. I'm talking about broad terms of prosperity, wealth, and relative comfort. There's never been a time in human history that has been as comfortable as now, that this comfort roughly correlates with prosperity. And I think we can observe very, very clearly that societies that have a lot of prosperity, look at ours, for example, tend to have a lot of promiscuity, not a lot of prudishness. Societies that don't have a lot of prosperity tend to be pruder. And this is the reason why, for years, when men have come to me with questions about marriage and relationships, I'm not a guru or expert, but I tell them what I think, and I think if you're really interested in this construct, then your best option is to go to a third world hellhole where women there are dependent on their men. They don't have a lot of money in general. They don't have a lot of material comfort, and live in that society and integrate. Then you might get a woman who will stick with you and will do her womanly duties in the house and pop out kids for you. And me saying that is a function of what we can readily observe here, that just like technology alters the mating market, so too does the relative amount of comfort, money, and prosperity available. Let's be honest. There's this notion that feminists used to use of women need men like fish need a bicycle. In some sense, that's true. In some sense, it's not, in terms of overall tax revenue, general financial contributions. But when there's enough comfort and prosperity circulating around, yeah, there's a manifestation of non-need. And this manifestation of quote-unquote non-need is not necessarily that women don't want relationships and don't want to interact with men at all. It's just that the key factor and key currency that women have to offer becomes mediated in a different way. And by a different way, I mean it becomes mediated by the fact that they're much looser with it because the stakes are just not as high. They're not going to lose sole access to the possibility of living under a warm roof or getting access to food they want or enjoying the niceties and accoutrements of life in a modern world. They're not going to lose that. So I think this is instinctual. Women naturally relax the restrictions on promiscuity. And because this is instinctual and occurs at the level of the subconscious, I don't think you can regulate this sort of thing. A lot of people talk about women regulating their behavior and restraining themselves and becoming aware of the prizes they're offering men prematurely. They need to hold out on for the sake of the future and their own prosperity. Maybe that's all true. But the reality is these are not conscious decisions. We are a bunch of apes hurtling about on a mud rock in some quadrant of the universe. And we're not really about thinking things through thoroughly, especially after millions of years of mammalian evolution. It just doesn't work that way. So as blackpilling as it might be, this is the model we are stuck with for the time being. And not only that, it is the circumstance that we all find ourselves in. So to the men out there that really want something long-term and sustainable, I again recommend the third world where the culture is fundamentally different and the dependencies are such that women will be pruder. They will hold out. They will be less likely to cheat and all of these things. Because the minute you have these other factors in play, wherever it might be in the world, the underlying biological factors emerge and surface. And there's not much at that point that culture can do, although you will get some variation, because the overall trend is prosperity leads to promiscuity. Anyway, gentlemen, thanks for tuning in. Please hit the like button. Please share the video, the bell icon to be informed of the forthcoming videos. And as always, if I'm still alive, I will check you out later. May the gods watch over you. Bye-bye. Enjoy your weekend. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.